All right, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Melissa Chobin, and I'm very pleased to be able to welcome a very special guest to Google today. She is Dr. Emma Seppälä, and she is the Science Director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University, author of The Happiness Track, and a leading expert on health psychology, well-being, and resilience. She founded the popular news site Fulfillment Daily and contributes to Psychology Today and Harvard Business Review. A thoughtful and sought-after speaker, Seppala has addressed academic, corporate, and governmental institutions. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, ABC News, Forbes, the Boston Globe, U.S. News and World Report, the Huffington Post, Inc., and Fast Company. Seppala holds degrees from Yale, Columbia, and Stanford. Originally from Paris, France, she speaks French, English, German, Spanish, and Mandarin Chinese. So please give Miss Seppala a very warm welcome.
So I'm going to start, since we're talking about happiness, I'm going to start with showing you something that I saw in downtown Palo Alto yesterday when I just got off the plane and I arrived and was looking for some lunch. I walked by a store. This is what it said in the window. Whoever said money can't buy happiness simply didn't know where to go shopping. Anybody know where this was? Right next to Life Kitchen. So when we think about the science of happiness and when we look at it as psychologists and researchers, there are two different kinds of happiness. And one is the happiness that we derive from sensual pleasures, the happiness we derive from things like shopping, for example, from food, from money, and even from awards and achievements. So all those things that give us some kind of material pleasure or the pleasure that we receive from succeeding in some small way. It gives us a boost. Then the other form of happiness that we look at, so the first form of happiness is something we call hedonic happiness, and the other form is called eudaimonic happiness, and that is happiness that's derived from things like pleasure, from things like meaning, from things like purpose, service, altruism, something beyond just your own self. And if you look at the research, the first type of pleasure, which is basically, you can think of it as a sex, drugs, and rock and roll pleasure. It's so fun, right? But it has a very momentary, short-lived life. It comes and goes very quickly, and that leads us to want more, which is actually evolutionarily adaptive, right? Because we want to eat again, or we want to look for a partner. That has ensured that we survived and that our ancestors survived and reproduced and so forth. But if we look at eudaimonic happiness, that's actually the source of much more long-lasting well-being. You can even think of it as fulfillment. It's not just a momentary joy. It's something that lasts, and I'll talk about that a little more. So that's just a little introduction to the topic of happiness since we're talking about that today. So one of the reasons that I wrote the happiness track was that I attended Yale and Stanford, and I've worked there for many years. And I saw that alongside the brilliance that's there, and I know many Google employees who went to fantastic universities, along with the brilliance and along with the excitement, the innovation, and the amazing learning opportunities, also sometimes came misery. And what I mean by that is high levels of stress, of anxiety. In my first year at Stanford as a graduate student, I was pretty giddy. Every day I was biking down Palm Drive, palm trees on either side. The sun is shining. I just moved from the East Coast, so I was warm every day. I was wearing a t-shirt every day. It was amazing. And I was learning from these legends. I mean, the people in the academics there are legends in their field. And yet, that first year I was there were 3 suicides on the campus. And I was thinking, wow, we have this amazing opportunity. We're in this place that people dream of coming to. And yet, there's so much despair. And those were, of course, extreme cases. But what I saw was that there was a lot of feelings of stress and anxiety, and I'll tell you one story that really exemplifies what I'm talking about. So I started the Psychology of Happiness class with my colleague, Carol Pertovsky, who's the head of health improvement, and I know some of you actually were students in that class, which is wonderful. And after one of the classes, a student came up to Carol and said, I have to drop out. It goes against everything I've ever learned. And Carol said, what do you mean? And she said, well, my parents told me I have to be very, very successful. So when I asked them, how do I become very, very successful, they said, you have to work very, very hard. And she said, okay. And then she went back to them and said, how do I know when I'm working hard enough? And they said, when you're suffering. Again, it's an extreme example, but it's one that we actually all buy into a little bit. It's one that we see, and it's one of the reasons we're seeing 50% burnout across industries. It doesn't matter if you work for a nonprofit, if you work for the medical field, we're seeing huge levels, and 50% is on the lower end of what we're seeing across industries. We're seeing that 80% of doctors' visits are due to stress. And we're also seeing that 75% of employees in the US workforce are disengaged. So, and that's not to mention, and we've all heard the impacts of stress, but it's been stress is linked to diseases that are, like asthma, diseases like diabetes, and a host of other things that we're seeing very much in our society today. So I was very interested in this topic of happiness, and I dove into it as a graduate student. And the more I dove into it, the more I was shocked to see that the research suggests something very different from what we're thinking. So the idea that we're buying into, the misconception that we have, is that in order to be successful, we have to sacrifice or at least postpone our own happiness now, with the idea that later we'll be successful and therefore we'll be happy. But if you look at the data, it actually proves us wrong. And I'm going to go through some theories of success that we have, and I'll go through them now so that you can see whether you can see that they are some of the ideas that we buy into. The first one is that you've got to focus on the future. You need to keep your eyes on the prize in order to get things done. And I'll go into that more. The idea that we can't have success without stress. Again, that is so exemplified by that student, what she shared. Persevere at all costs. Just keep going. Work to exhaustion sometimes, but that is the way to meet your goals. Focus on your niche. Become an expert. Become the go-to person in your field. Spend most of your time reading up on it and becoming the person who knows absolutely everything. And then play to your strengths. You're good at some things, other things you're weaker at. Do the things you're good at. And finally, look out for number one. It's kind of a dog-eat-dog world. It's competitive. You have to look out for yourself first, and sometimes that means elbowing people out of the way. Would you agree that those are some of the theories that are out there? Whether or not they're yours, they're some of the theories that we hear about and learn about. I'm going to go through some of them, and I'll tell you a little bit about what the data says. Focus on the future. Focus on the future means keeping a mind on your goals and on where you want to go at all times. There's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, it's a great idea to have ambitions and to have a kind of a game plan of what you would like. However, we can spend most of our time with our mind in the future, and that actually is problematic. So actually, much of the time, our mind is wandering. How many of you have had your mind wander since I started talking? Okay, good. It means you're normal. So I'm not going to take it personally. So 50% of the time, our mind wanders. Research out of Harvard was done in which there was a study in which participants took a BlackBerry home, and they were pinged randomly throughout the day and asked, what are you doing? What are you thinking about? And how are you feeling? So basically, they were looking at, were people thinking about what they were doing, or was their mind wandering? And how did that make them feel? The most interesting thing was the results. The results showed that when you are never happier than when you are in the present moment. So even if your mind is wandering to something you'd rather be doing, let's say you're doing something you really don't like your taxes, or like entering data, or something that is boring to you, and your mind is wandering to your next vacation, which will be in Hawaii. You will be happier actually if you're 100% with your taxes. Hope that's motivation for everybody. But if you think about it, when our mind is in the future, the emotions that brings up is anxiety. It's negative emotions, oftentimes. Not always, but oftentimes. And so, when you're more present, you're actually more productive, you can get more done. And we can actually spend a lot of time not being present, and because of how much we're interrupted during the day through technology, which is a wonderful thing, obviously, we're at Google, but on the same level, we are interrupted a lot through text messages, through phones, through emails, through messaging. And we're constantly being pulled out of what we're doing, which is actually impacts our productivity a lot. More than being interrupted, we interrupt ourselves by taking that phone and checking it for no good reason in the middle of something that we're doing, which we were focused. The other thing that's a very big predictor of our success and our happiness is our relationships with other people. And those are very important in the workplace. And one thing that very successful people seem to have is charisma. And we often think of charisma as this skill, this special je ne sais quoi that you're born with. These people just walk in the room and they're magnetic, and they just, it's like a gift, or it's some kind of talent that they have. But what research shows is that no, it's not. It's a skill. It's something you can master. So the examples are often given of people like Bill Clinton, who apparently would just come in the room and he would make you feel like you were the only person in the room. So people with charisma are often described that way. I felt like I was the only person in the room. What does that mean, actually? It just means that that person was being 100% present with you. And if you look at charisma and research on charisma, what the data shows is that it has a lot to do with being able to be fully present with another person. And think about it. How often is somebody really present with you? How often are you talking to someone and they're scanning the room? Or they're like, oh, really? And they're looking at their phone. Or you're talking to them and you're like, they're not listening to me right now. You can tell. It's so rare to actually have someone who fully listens to you. Other skills of highly charismatic people are the ability to empathize with another person, to really understand what they're going through. And you can only do that if you're 100% tuned in. Our physiology is built for empathy. That's why when you see someone tripping down the hall, you cringe. That's why when you look at someone whose face crinkles up into a cry because they're crying, or who is angry, you mirror that person with your own facial muscles, whether you know it or not, and that's what empathy is. But if you're not fully present, you don't tap into that very natural skill that you have. So I could go on about empathy, but there are a lot of reasons to be why presence actually makes us more successful and happier. And I could go more into that later too. So focusing on the future, yes, it's a good thing, but most of the time we want to stay present. Next is the idea of no success without stress. That it's just impossible not to have stress in some capacity. And I would think that's something we all really buy into. And you know, short-term stress is fantastic. It gets us through that deadline. It gets us through, it gets us across the street when there's oncoming traffic. It mobilizes our entire body to just move forward towards a goal. But if you're having it all the time, and I'm sure you've heard this ad nauseum because it's been talked about so much, it actually breaks your body down, but it also breaks your mind down. It impacts skills like attention, it impacts skills like memory, it impacts skills like emotional intelligence, the ability to respond to people in a way that's really skillful. It impacts your decision making as well. Yet we've come to a point where we completely depend on that adrenaline. That's why we over-caffeinate. That's why we overschedule ourselves. That's why we wait until the last minute to get things done, because there's just a sense that's the only way. And that's why we do all of that. And yet, that's why we burn out. Because when you're constantly in a state of high adrenaline, your body is overworking all the time, and you are wearing yourself out completely, which is why, oh, it's 2 p.m. I need another coffee. I need another jolt because I'm so exhausted. There's a better way to manage your energy, and that's to tap into another part of your nervous system, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, to calm yourself down. And I've worked with arguably the most stressed individuals in our society, which are veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan with trauma. They're locked into a permanent state of fight or flight because of what they've been through, which was, it's a very normal reaction to a very unusual circumstances of being at war. And working with them, I saw that it was so, the therapies that they were going through hadn't helped those who were in the study, nor had the pharmaceuticals. And the intervention we used with them is an intervention that taps right into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is very simple. You're doing it right now. It's breathing. We don't tap into this, and it's a really fantastic, best-kept secret about the breath. And I go into this a lot in the book, but just in short, when you breathe deeply, when you breathe slowly, and when you lengthen your exhales, you are relaxing your entire body. Your heart rate decreases, your blood pressure decreases. So if you remember anything from today, remember slower, deeper, and lengthen. Slow, deepen, and lengthen the exhales, especially. When you inhale, your heart rate increases. When you exhale, your heart rate decreases. So if it worked for them, it can work for you as well. So that's why I'm sharing this with you. And I also know that your well-being group here teaches a lot about breathing, so you should definitely look into that. I want to tell you a story about that. And just because it sounds so simple, we've all heard it, take a deep breath, who cares? Well, here's a story. A friend of mine, Jake, was probably on the most stressful commute you could imagine. He was on a military convoy in Afghanistan. He was the officer in charge of the very last vehicle. Somehow none of the other vehicles drove over this IED, the improvised explosive device, but his did. He heard a really loud bang. When the dust settled, he looked down, and his legs were severed below the knee. He had learned a breathing technique in a book called On Combat by Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, which was a book that helped military members to learn some skills, including breathing. He learned a technique in which I think it's called the square breath, which you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. He dropped right into that in that moment. He had the presence of mind to do that. And as he did that, he had the wherewithal to check on his men. Is everybody okay? To then give orders to call in for help. He had the presence of mind to look down at his legs and tourniquet them himself, to lift them up, prop them up. And then when he knew that everything was done, he had done his duty, and that help was coming, that's when he lay down and passed out at that moment. Later, he was told if he hadn't done that, he would have bled to death or fallen into a coma. So it's a very intense example, I know, but it's also an example that really shows us the power we have over our own mind, no matter what we're going through, to calm ourselves. And even if we're not saving our life, that day we may be saving our day. We may be able to resolve a situation much, much better. So please take this with you. And so the idea is here that, yes, we have a lot of stressful situations that come at us. We have a lot of demands. They can be work demands. They can be personal demands. But we have the choice of how resilient we are in that moment. We do have a choice. And we've often been told, oh, just talk yourself out of it, or try to talk yourself into being more relaxed. It doesn't really work. We know that. But you can tap into your parasympathetic nervous system. We're so used to being always in fight or flight. So just learning to actually tap into that other side. It's a real gift that we have. So strengthen your resilience. So the next idea is to persevere at all costs. Just keep going. Sometimes it means burning the candle at both ends. Sometimes it means completely exhausting yourself because you just have to do it. And again, here what we're doing is we're really mismanaging our energy. So just as I was saying that we choose to tap into our adrenaline, we want to be stressed in order to get through things. We've gotten to the point where we think we can't get something done unless we really do have this high intensity life, this adrenaline rush. We actually think the same thing, even in our leisure. So if you ask Americans to define happiness, it's very interesting because happiness can be defined in different ways. For example, happiness can happy emotions include calmness, serenity, peacefulness. They include emotions on the other side of intensity: excitement, thrill, enthusiasm, elation. If you ask Americans to define happiness, they will say excitement, enthusiasm, thrill, elation, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. It's fantastic. But we love high intensity at every level. We like high intensity in terms of our negative emotions because we think it'll get us more work done, and we like it in our leisure as well. And again, here I'm just talking about energy management. It's fantastic to be enthusiastic, excited. In fact, I'm pretty enthusiastic right now. But the idea is to manage your energy, so when you don't need to be giving your all, when you don't need to be in high stress, and you don't need to be in high intensity, that you don't have to be. And I'm going to share with you a tip, because this is a working tip in terms of energy management, but also later I'm going to go into why this actually makes you more creative as well. If you have your day in front of you with your number of tasks that you have, the best way for you to manage your energy and to tap into your most creative potential for that day is to sandwich high and low intensity activities back to back. And what I mean by that, by high intensity, is the ones that are very intellectually rigorous, intellectually demanding. They do require all of your attention. And then the ones that are lower intensity are the ones that you can do, but that they let your mind wander a little bit. They let you relax a little bit. It could be cleaning your desk. It could be entering data. Whatever those, or maybe administrative paperwork, whatever it is that's not so demanding. And when you alternate that, not only will it help you manage your energy, but it'll actually make you more creative and more productive in those moments when you're doing the high intensity activities that are very demanding. So that is all based on some research in organizational psychology. So the next one is focus on your niche. This one sounds like it really makes sense. You really have to focus, and in order to come up with the most innovative, disruptive solutions in your field, you really need to be a master of it. You need to read up on the latest developments. You need to know everything that's going on all the time. And if you look at what CEOs are looking for in the incoming workforce, the number one thing that they say they want in incoming employees is creativity. Of course, right? Because you have to come up with novel solutions to be the best in your field. And yet, if you look at research on creativity, we are at our most creative when our mind is very relaxed, very idle. Have you ever had that happen to you when you're just about to go to sleep and you're lying there and all of a sudden you have this great idea about this thing you were working on? Or you're in the shower and you're like, oh my gosh, the solution is here, that eureka moment. And there's a lot of data to back that up. Our brain is most creative when it's in delta mode, which is that very relaxed, daydreamy, idle, little sleepy moment. And that's something that we sometimes these days never access. Never access. Think about it. I'm not going to ask how many of you sleep with your phone under your pillow or right there in hand's reach, but I would probably say most of you. I don't know, I don't want to judge, but in general, most people do that, right? Because you have to for whatever reason. But what that means is when you wake up, you look at your screen. You're focused. Then you get up, do whatever. You're commuting or whatever it is that you're doing. If you're standing at the bus, you're looking at your screen. You're waiting for a plane, you're looking at your screen. All those, you're standing at the groceries, send off another quick email or text. Again, nothing wrong with that. So great to be connected. And yet, in the past, we would take those moments to be idle. We would wait for the bus, and we would just wait for the bus. We would stand in line at the groceries, and we'd just stand in line at the groceries. And those were moments that were really priming our mind to have those creative, innovative insights. We can spend our entire day focused. Not only is this energy mismanagement, but it's also hampering our creative ability, which is arguably one of the most important things, no matter in your work or your personal life. Think about it. I don't know how many of you have kids, but sometimes it takes a lot of creativity to get them to eat some food or to get them to sleep, right? So these are all things that we need this, besides that creativity brings a lot of joy. And I interviewed some of the greatest, most creative minds when I was writing the happiness track. Nobel laureates, award-winning writers, and what I found again and again was that they make time for silence, walks by themselves without a phone. They make time for meditation and activities that really just calm and settle their mind. They also make time to diversify what they're doing. Instead of focusing only on their niche, they're learning completely different things. How many of you are aware of a platform called Innocentive? It's an online platform in which organizations like NASA will pose a problem. We need to find a new kind of fuel made from corn that's really efficient and environmentally friendly, or something like that. And when you look at it, so scientists and engineers respond, and they can make some money off of that. When you look at who is most likely to resolve the problems posed, it's not people in that field. It's people just outside of it. That ability to see things from a different perspective. And that's what generates creativity. So it's so great to focus on your niche. Yes, be an expert, but don't limit yourself. Research on students who take semesters abroad or do semester at sea shows that when they come back after witnessing new cultures, new ways of being, are much more creative than other people. So this should be an excuse to disengage from work, an excuse to learn those different things that you want to learn but that you just don't have time for because you're so busy, an excuse to really take some time to just be idle and do nothing, which is so counterintuitive and seems so counterproductive, and yet it is the most productive thing you can do, but it also is going to boost your well-being in so many ways. Here's another one, play to your strengths. So we actually really have always learned that, right? Okay, I'm a math person, therefore I must do math kind of things. Or I'm a people person, or I'm just not a creative person, or I am a creative person. So we have this sense. And again, when you look at the research, what does the research say? Our brains are meant to develop and to learn. We know that our brain will continuously learn. You can be 91 and you can learn the piano. It doesn't matter how old you are. And yet, when we are married to this idea of just playing to our strengths, it also makes us less resilient sometimes. Because as soon as we fail, we have this idea, oh, I failed at this, therefore I must not be good at it, therefore I'm not going to do that anymore. So research actually out of Stanford University, Carol Dweck, a professor there, has shown this with children, with adults. If you believe this idea that you have certain talents and gifts and you don't have other talents and gifts, so you should avoid them, it actually makes you less resilient, more anxious and depressed in the face of failure or challenge, and it makes you less likely to grow. I mean, just think about it. If you stay within the box in which you identify yourself as a people person or a math person or whatever, and you don't go where you think you're not good at, you actually limit yourself tremendously. And there's so much data on that and that we can go into. But it also really ties into self-criticism. So we often think of self-criticism as be your own worst critic. It's really important because then that will lead to self-improvement. That's another huge myth. So research on self-criticism shows that if you are self-critical, you're more likely to be anxious, depressed, you'll have fear of failure, you're less likely to be resilient in the face of failures, mistakes, which we all make all the time. And a much better solution to that is self-compassion. It sounds really soft, but it's actually really smart and supported by a lot of hard data. Self-compassion is simply the ability to treat yourself as you would a friend. So let's say you fail at something. Think about how you speak to yourself in that moment. I'll give you an example. You're running a marathon. You've been training for months, first marathon ever. You're running along, you trip and fall. Someone on the sideline says, "You're such a loser. You can't run. Oh my gosh, you're never going to finish this thing." How do you feel? Compared to someone in the other side. Everybody falls. It's totally normal. You're doing great. You could totally do this. Just imagine how the difference feels. We're doing the same thing to ourselves. With self-criticism, research shows self-criticism is self-sabotage. But the ability to treat yourself like that person who's more supportive is how you would speak to a friend. Presumably when your friend fails, you speak to them like that. You remind them, everyone makes mistakes. It's just a human thing. And you're going to do fine. And you're being supportive in that way. So again, it sounds very soft, but it if you are more self-compassionate, you are more resilient. You are more likely to learn from your experiences. You're more emotionally resilient, you're more emotionally intelligent, and you also have better relationships with other people. That better relationship with yourself translates into better relationships with other people. So again, instead of playing to your strengths, play to your strengths. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I'm saying you should also branch out, because only then are you going to realize the plethora of other talents that you can develop. And finally, this is my very favorite one. Look out for number 1. Again, the idea, it's dog-eat-dog world, sink or swim, compete at all costs. There's this idea of survival of the fittest. Anybody know who said survival of the fittest? No, he didn't say that. Just Herbert Spencer, social Darwinist. He wanted to justify social and racial hierarchies. That's why he introduced this idea. If you look at Darwin's message, it was much more akin to what he was saying was that sympathy is what really led to human survival over the long run. Look at us. Look at our skin. We're so fragile. We're so vulnerable. There is no way we could have lived out in the wild if we didn't have each other. It's not even possible. And that's what one of the things that Darwin was saying is that natural tendency towards sympathy, empathy, compassion is the reason why we were able to survive. And yet there's this idea also in the business world, well, and that economists have propagated, that we are selfish. Aren't we all looking out for ourselves first? Again, no, if you look at the research. If you give people very little time to make a decision as to whether they should act fairly and generously versus selfishly, their first instinct is to act generously and fairly. If you give them a little more time to think about it, maybe they'll change their mind. But the same is true in children. The same is true as animals. Rats. If a rat sees another rat suffering that they can help out of their quandary, they're going to do it. At that level of rats. And then we see it in much more evolved animals too, like apes and chimps and human beings as small as 2 years old. They will help if they see someone in need of help. It's very much within our nervous system. It's very much a very natural tendency within us. And yet we hear that, but aren't we all selfish? There is a very interesting study conducted at Stanford Business School, actually, by Dale Miller, looking at why people don't help when they're given the opportunity. And often people will stop themselves because of the norm of self-interest, because of this idea that's out there that we are all selfish. So for example, in one study, these men were asked, would you like to support this breast cancer event? And they said, sure. And then later they changed their mind when they were finding out that they had to go to this meeting. When they were asked, well, why? The idea was that maybe people would think they were there to pick up women because it was an all-female event, right? So they were stopping themselves from doing something they wanted to help because they thought, well, everyone else is going to think I'm doing it selfishly. There are a number of reasons why we stop ourselves. But let's look at the workplace. I'll give you an example of someone I'll call Drake. He worked in an investment bank. And he moved to this investment bank. It's called Bear Stearns. It went under a number of years ago. But he moved into that bank from another bank. And when he got there, it was such a ruthless place. The other people at his level, the other MDs, wouldn't even address him in the hallway. They wouldn't even say hello. People would compete for each other's clients and try to steal each other's credit for each other's work. It was completely ruthless. And when Drake arrived there, he thought, well, I can't do anything about the people around me. But he is a very kind person. He's a very supportive person. And he wasn't going to change his values. So he actually started treating the associates who worked with him as according to his values. He treated them very well. He gave them opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise have had. The other bankers would work the associates into the ground. On Sunday night, after coming back from their vacation home in Long Island, they would call their associates and be like, I need this by tomorrow morning on my desk, even if it wasn't due the next morning. And then the associates would be expected to work throughout the rest of the day as well. So they would do all these brutal things. And that was the norm. So Drake didn't do that. In fact, he gave the employees a lot of opportunities. He took them to client meetings, let them present, do things that they never would have done at their level. what ended up happening is he won one of the largest deals in his field, and he continued doing really well. And the associates would work with the partners or the MDs that they wanted to work with. So the MDs would pitch, and then the associates could decide who they wanted to work with. Usually they would work with the person who would usually bring in the greatest deals because that was in their best interest. But once they started finding out how Drake was treating people, they all started working with him, and he started doing so well, to the point where the other MDs, for the first time ever, actually came up to him and were like, "What are you doing? Why does everyone want to work with you?" And so if you look at research across the board, research shows that when our leaders and our colleagues are more positive, are more supportive, we're more loyal, we're more engaged, our health is better. And employees and employers often think, well, employees are only as loyal as the biggest paycheck, right? If someone next door or gives them a bigger paycheck, they're going to leave. But research shows that no, employees prefer to be happy in a workplace than to get a bigger paycheck elsewhere. And that happiness is defined by their social relationships with other people, by the level of kindness and support that they have for each other. And if you think about it, we spend more and more of our time at work of the day. We probably spend more time at work than with our families, right? So this is a place where we obviously want to feel that connection, obviously want to feel that happiness. There's so much more to say. I'm going to stop here and I'll take questions. And I really hope that from today you can take with you that taking care of yourself is the best thing you can do, not just for your own happiness, but it is for your professional goals. And not just taking care of yourself, but also taking care of those around you. And one more thing about that is that, as I spoke about at the beginning of the talk, happiness can be defined as this more pleasurable happiness, which is very short-lived, or a more meaningful life that's defined by compassion, by kindness, by caring for other people. And research shows that when you do engage in a life that goes beyond yourself, that involves being a positive impact and being someone who uplifts other people, you're also not just going to be happier, you're going to be healthier. You're going to even live a longer life. So there is so much data to back up why happiness is such an important feature of our lives, and why it's also, you don't have to sacrifice it in order to be successful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks so much for your talk. I have a number of questions about, I guess the first one is stress being problematic. Is it due to a level of intensity that is beyond someone's capacity, or is it because there's disempowerment? Is it because you're given problems that you don't feel you can possibly solve, and you get into this hopeless state? So kind of another way of asking this is it possible to work sustainably at high intensity when you don't feel disempowered without it having adverse effect on your health?
Thanks for asking that. Absolutely. The truth is we can't control our environment. Stressful things will happen to us, whether we're in a stressful work environment or not. We'll have personal things that happen to us that are stressful. We all have in this room. We've all had it. We all will continue to have it. The only thing we can control is our internal resilience. And we can build that resilience up so that we are more capable of dealing with those situations without being so torn up by them. So that's my point there. And one of the ways is breathing, but I talk about some other ways as well in the book. But that was my point. So thanks for asking that.
So related to that, do you know of people, for example, who can work, in Silicon Valley at the pace of the tech world, sustainably, but through breathing techniques and other techniques, they're able to avoid a lot of the common pitfalls, but still keep this high pace of work output?
Well, does anybody know Mark Ball?
Yeah.
Would you say he exemplifies that?
Pretty much.
Mark Ball teaches these breathing practices at Google. He's been working here forever, and he's kind of he absolutely comes to mind when you ask that. I highly recommend that you all meet him, and then I guess does he teach with you guys or?
It's a separate program called Sky Meditation.
He teaches Sky Meditation, which is the breathing that I research with veterans as well. So I recommend taking his class.
You made a great argument for being compassionate towards yourself, breathing being one way to tap into that. What other tools do you see as being key to
Self-compassion.
self-care?
Self-care or self-compassion?
Self-compassion.
Self-compassion. Another way is just watching how you talk to yourself. It's a hard one, especially because we've so much bought into this idea that we have to criticize ourselves, and we've heard other people do it. And it's really just having that internal check. And I think that's where also practices like meditation can help, because you can become more aware of what's going on the inside. And then you can also do something very concrete, which is, and it can sound a little cheesy, but it actually works. Research shows writing yourself a letter in the face. Let's say you've just failed at something, you feel completely down about yourself. Writing a letter as if you were writing to a friend to whom this happened can be very therapeutic. So those are some of the ways. The other thing is also to have a self-compassion mantra or some kind of phrase that you already know by heart, so that you can bring it up in that moment. You know, it could be whatever it is. In fact, the woman who started research on self-compassion, she had a child with autism, and it was a little boy, and they were on a plane, and he was having a huge crisis, and the bathrooms were closed. She couldn't get into the bathroom. She had to be there with him, making this huge fuss on the plane. There was nothing she could do, and in that moment, she became very aware of the impact of self-compassion. If she could soothe herself in that moment, she could handle that crisis, which there was nothing she could do otherwise. So it's very powerful. And she suggests having these self-compassion mantras. So maybe just a phrase that you bring to mind and that you just know ahead of time that you can tell yourself. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Of course.
Thank you, Emma, for coming. This was a great talk. You know, I'm just looking at the slide that you have up there about look out for number one. What advice would you have for organizations to build a system which doesn't, encourages people to just chase for number one and be more cooperative, inclusive, and have more psychological safety and trust with each other as also governing factors of success, not just who's at the top?
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons I wrote this book. It's categorized in the business category for a reason. If employers, if leaders know about this, they will impact the entire organization. And by impacting and benefiting the entire organization, they also benefit all of those employees' families. I mean, it's a huge repercussion. And really what I would say is look at the data. There is so much data now that shows that having a bad boss is bad for your heart. Like, it leads to heart problems. It leads to higher inflammation. Literally. I mean, this is dramatic, and yet people don't know about it. So, and the opposite is true. So if you have a organization that's supported by trust, respect, empathy, it doesn't mean you have to be soft. It doesn't mean you have to be a pushover. You can still give feedback, but you can do it in a supportive way instead of like an accusatory way. The other day I was in the which newspaper was it? The Wall Street Journal. There was an article that said, it was an article about front stabbing. It was this organization that was all about, let's stop backstabbing here, let's start front stabbing, give it to people. And then they'll learn. And it just goes so against the data. I mean, that's a great way to not just stress individuals out and bring them down, make them want to leave. I mean, there's so many reasons not to do that. But you can give feedback. You can give feedback, and you can do it in a really supportive way that helps people grow. And it actually makes them more loyal to you. I'll tell you a story, actually. This is a story that I wrote about in the Harvard Business Review, interviewing actually my boss, who's also a neurosurgeon. When he was a young resident, he was helping the surgeon do this very complicated brain surgery. And he was so nervous that he was sweating. And his sweat dripped into the operation area. The surgeon was so angry at him, he just kicked him out of the room, basically called him a loser. You're never going to be able to do this. Now he knows that if sweat has dropped into the area, you can very easily irrigate it, and it can be removed fast. Now, the same thing happened when Dr. Doty was himself a surgeon, and he had a resident come in. And the resident, in one moment, did not pay attention, and he pierced a vein in the operation. There was blood all over the brain. In that moment, Dr. Doty couldn't see what he was doing, and it could have cost him the life of this person. Fortunately, he reached in and blindly clipped the vein and was able to save it. But in that moment, what he did was he told the resident, why don't you go outside? Just calm yourself down, and when you're ready, you can come back inside, and we'll talk about, how we can, I'll teach you a few things. What a different response. think about if you were that resident, how you would feel toward that person for the rest of your life. Obviously, you're devastated by your mistake. You'll probably be loyal to that person forever. That's inspirational leadership. That is true loyalty. If someone else comes along and says, hey, why don't you come work for me? They'll be like, I'm sorry, like, I love this person, literally, right?
So I read the intro to your book, that's as far as we've gotten, and it was really, really captivating. It's just this great microcosm of that super busy tech Silicon Valley life where you're just chasing something, day in, day out.
Yeah.
So really kind of just drew me in. My question is, let's say you can get past some of those extrinsic motivators, you start to be more self-compassionate, self-loving, and you recognize that you don't have to do everything, accomplish everything to be a good person, and it's just more about choosing. Should I take the 10 minutes before bed to brush my teeth or to do some stretching, yoga? Should I read a book? There's so many things we could do to improve, learn a language. Did you encounter in the research anything about decisiveness or just sort of choosing what to apply your attention, that self-compassion attention towards?
Well, what the research shows is that any of those activities that you talked about that are nourishing are going to benefit you. It's more about choosing between something that will benefit you and something that seems productive, but that will wear you out. And I think that's really the quandary people are in. It's like, well, but my inbox, I could just empty it. There's that desire for the empty inbox, which never comes. We all have it, right? And yet, so it's more that choice. But I think if you're choosing something that nourishes you, that gives you time to disengage, that gives you time to relax, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it also involves, in you very much as an individual, we all know what nourishes us. For some of us, we need to go out and be with 20 best friends. For others, we need to be alone. Like, it just depends. So, yeah.
Very cool. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Of course.
I wanted to ask about boredom. You were talking a little bit about that we don't have so much time sort of off doing nothing, and I think you mentioned being bored or boredom. But I'm wondering, is that sort of the goal, or is it just being more relaxed? Or because I feel like if I'm bored, I get stressed out about being bored.
Thank you for sharing that. I need to share with you this study. So in this study, in the first study, participants were given the choice, you can either sit there and just do nothing, or you can sit there and do this really boring task. People chose to do the really boring task. Then the scientists looked at, okay, well, here, you can sit in this room, do nothing. You can either sit there and do nothing, or you can play with that machine that gives you electric shocks. Even those people who said the electric shocks were very disagreeable and very painful preferred to do that than to sit there and do nothing. So thank you for asking that question. There's a profound discomfort sometimes of doing nothing. And Louis C.K., by the way, has a fantastic episode on that. But in some sense, it's also because of our high-pressure lifestyle and the anxiety that can arise. And I saw this a lot with the veterans that I worked with. If I had just told them to sit there and meditate as a first thing that they do, they may not have taken to it. Because the first thing that we do when we stop, especially when we're used to going all the time, is we can feel a lot of anxiety, like you were saying. Thank you for sharing that, because you're not the only one. And that's why it can be, but it's something that if you sit through it for a little bit and if you just get used to it, that's going to be much better than continuously trying to cover that up with activity, because that just continues you into that cycle. And so, but again, I would really recommend doing like the breathing or the meditation and some of the things that are going on here, learning to just be with that discomfort, because what happens is it goes away. But if we're always covering it up, it's still there. Yeah. So, but thanks for bringing that up, because you know what? I think pretty much everyone feels that. So, and that's probably the reason why we so much need to distract ourselves, even if it's work all the time. Yeah. But if you look at kids are great people too. They're the most creative individuals in our society. They come up with, you give them nothing and they've created a whole kingdom out of it, right? And they're constantly in that state of daydreaming. They're constantly present. They're constantly connected with one another. It's just something very natural. So that means we have it too, because we were kids once, a long time ago.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So since you brought up children, I have a question where I found this theme among parents where there's kind of a desire that, well, now that they're kids and they can do all these different things, this is the time to have lots of variety, lots of right? Because when they get older and they get in a job, they'll only do one thing for the rest of their lives. So let's give them a chance now to do soccer, tennis, swimming, ballet, and everything. But then there's the question of the over-programming. And I'm wondering, to what extent do you think there's a benefit to doing lots of things as opposed to just doing one thing and then open time?
Honestly, every talk I've given on the book so far, I've been asked these questions from parents, and it's so poignant. It's such a good question. I think that one of the women that last week, she asked, I could see pain in her eyes. She was like, I really want my child to get into Harvard, so I have to get her to do all this stuff, and yet my child is so stressed. It's so sad. I would say, have your child do what makes them happy, and if it's one activity, and then give them time to be. Give them time to be a child first and foremost. And it's so interesting. I shared this also, is that I was an undergrad at Yale and a grad student at Columbia and Stanford, and I worked at Stanford, and then I worked at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is all the best students in Wisconsin get into that school, but it's obviously not like the Harvard-Yale caliber. Where were the students most balanced, most happy, most in touch with their values, most in touch with their community? In Wisconsin. There was and the Stanford students, the Yale students, so talented, and they're so, and they're geniuses in so many ways, and they're so, I'm sure many of you are students who've been to those places, and yet the stress level's so high, they haven't learned how to relax, and also there's a sense of disconnect from the community. And this is a piece of research I haven't shared yet, but that I want to share, is that the most important thing after food and shelter for our happiness, well-being, health, and longevity is connection, social connection, positive connections with other people. And yet, when we're constantly being told, achieve, be the best, be number one, go, 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 we are very stressed and we're very self-focused. I'm not saying we're selfish, but we're self-focused naturally. And when you're stressed, your self-focus increases naturally. This is something, imagine our ancestors running away from some predator. They better be self-focused in that moment, right? And yet, over time, with chronic stress, and this self-focus actually leads to misery. 1 in 4 Americans says they have no one to speak to about a personal problem. 1 in 4 people you meet is profoundly lonely. So I'm going into a little bit of a tangent, but not really. Like, let's teach our children to be happy. Let's value their happiness. They'll be more creative. They'll be more productive. They'll work because they are interested in the topic, not because they have to do it because they have to get into Harvard. You know what I mean? I think it's such an important question, and I'm going to try and I've been drafting an op-ed about it because I've received this question at every talk, and parents feel like I have to keep my child on the correct route. But at the same time, there's this disconnect. So thank you for asking.
Thank you.
But thank you again, and may happiness be yours.